Hey everyone, welcome to this week's themes video where we explore some of the main interpretive questions that you should be paying attention to in our reading. This week, I want to cover 5 main themes for you to pay attention to. And of course, I'll be working with this edition of Beowulf that we are reading from, this brand new edition from 2020. We could not have a better, more modern edition to be working from, so that's super exciting. So theme 1 is about Herod. And if you remember, Herod is this mead hall that Hrothgar builds for his kingdom. And it receives a lot of attention in the narrative, even though it's not a person. It seems to act like its own character, even though it's not a person. And it's described in a lot of vivid detail throughout the story. So for example, if you look at line 68, the narrator says, "This is more than just a mead hall, a world's wonder, 8th of 7." There's a lot of attention to how meaningful and important this hall is, and then how desecrated it becomes when Grendel, for 12 seasons, kills people there and kind of keeps it empty. So my first question that I'd like you to think about as you read is, what symbolic place does Herod occupy in the narrative? Why is so much attention paid to it? What does it symbolize that this is what Grendel attacks and this is what Beowulf must essentially rescue? What does Herod mean to Hrothgar's people and kingdom? Okay, that's theme 1. Theme 2 is about masculinity. If you haven't noticed by now, Beowulf is obsessed with men. It's obsessed with men interacting with one another, and it's obsessed with a certain familiar form of like masculine bravado. Every man in the story is performing his masculinity for someone who's watching him. So this story to me feels very obsessed with masculinity, and our new translation really seems to capture that. Its first word is bro. So I want us to think a little bit about what this text is doing with masculinity and male-male relations. A more scholarly term we might apply here is that of homosociality, which is a word that refers to social relations within a specific gender. So we could talk about male homosociality in this text and how Beowulf seems very obsessed with male homosociality, or the social relations between men. You'll notice that the text foregrounds very specific kinds of male relations. There's the relationship of thane and ring giver. Beowulf has a close relationship to Hygelac back in his own kingdom. He is Hygelac's thane. He also has a very close relationship with Hrothgar in the kingdom where Grendel is. Later on, he's challenged by Unferth, who says Beowulf's not as good as he says he is. He's challenged by Grendel. And later on in the story, when Beowulf is very old, he's challenged in some ways by Wiglaf. So there's a lot of men kind of competing with one another, performing their masculinity for one another, sizing each other up. What do you think this text is saying about all of that masculinity? Why is it focusing so heavily and intently on that masculinity? I will love to hear your thoughts on that in the discussion board. Moving on to theme 3, as I've mentioned in other videos, Christianity is definitely woven into this tale. We see Grendel as a descendant of Cain. He is God cursed. He seems to be tied with sin, and sin seems to render him monstrous. So there's a connection between being sinful and being a monster here in this text. So we could ask too, what is Grendel's motivation for launching this attack? Does that have some kind of Christian meaning in the tale? He seems to be kind of against community or sociality. He's annoyed by all of the noise and the music and the poetry and the singing that happens in the mead hall. Alternatively, some have wondered, is Grendel against colonizers? You'll notice in lines 85 and so on that these men, Hrothgar's men, seem very entitled to this land. They say, the Almighty made earth for us, fens full of creatures for our feasting, meres to quench our thirst. Perhaps Grendel is fighting back against this kind of colonial overlay that these people seem to represent too. Those are some things to think about in your post. Another theme is the relationship between glory and pride. These two things tend to be in tension with one another. Glory we know is really important in epic narratives when we think again of the Iliad and the Odyssey. Heroes need to achieve glory through performing great, notable acts, defeating huge, terrible villains. At the same time, Christianity says that pride or arrogance is a bad thing. And these two things seem really kind of closely related. So I think a really key question about Beowulf is he rightfully seeking glory, or is he veering into pride and arrogance? There's a lot of interesting components to the story that address this. Unferth says that Beowulf is arrogant, and they have an entire exchange that I think is really worth paying attention to, starting at line 498. And then how does Beowulf relate to Grendel? Is Grendel arrogant, and is Beowulf arrogant like him, or is he different from Grendel in that way? You could ask the same thing about Beowulf and Beowulf at the end of the story. Is Beowulf a humble alternative to Beowulf's arrogance, or do they both pursue glory in equally important ways? I think this is a really interesting tension I'd like to hear your thoughts on. And then finally, theme 5, women in Beowulf. So the first question we want to ask is, where are the women in the story? Well, we have numerous queens that are mentioned in this story, like Wealhtheow and Modthryth. They kind of appear in the margins, but our translator, Maria Devana Headley, thinks that those queens are in fact very important, making crucial negotiations on behalf of their family, etc. The other key woman or female in this story is Grendel's mother, certainly the most formidable, most prominent woman in this story. We can note that she's without her own name. She's referred to in relation to her son. She's really the only female warrior in this story. And she also avenges the death of her son according to accepted and acceptable blood feud convention. So there's a way in which Grendel's mother acts within her legal rights to avenge the death, the murder of her son. So does this tale make Grendel's mother a monster to be loathed, or does it cast up some sympathy for her in this way? I always think that's a really interesting question about Grendel's mother, and I'd really love to hear what you think about her in particular. Furthermore, the dragon is also referred to as a female in the story as well. So what do you think? Earlier we mentioned that this text is very masculine-centric. So how do women function in this narrative? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well, and I'm really looking forward to reading your discussion posts. All right, take care, everyone. I'll see you on the discussion board.